I have a question for you. How do your fish make you feel? Some fish may relax you, some fish may frustrate you. But have you ever had a fish that makes you laugh? They're just so goofy, and when you watch them, they make you laugh. They make you happy. In this video, we're going to talk about a fish that is one of the funniest fish that I've ever had in the fish room, so stay tuned. Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and in this video we're going to be talking about a really cool fish that's a little bit rare, but if you ever have a chance to find them, I highly recommend you pick them up, and that is Rhinogobius hennechuensis. It is a freshwater, a true freshwater goby that I think you're going to enjoy. And this is Rhinogobius hennechuensis. We picked up a couple bags of these at a Greenwater Aquarium Society meeting a couple years ago, and these have been awesome little fish. Again, we're looking at a 10-gallon here, and I want to spend a couple seconds just talking about why we love them. They're goofy. You can see them here. Even when they're not trying to be goofy, they are. They're just kind of sitting here on the rocks. They can connect themselves to the side of the glass. I have seen them where they actually make big goby piles. I mean, how many fish do you know that actually just sit out there in the open and make a pile of gobies? Unfortunately, they didn't make a pile of gobies for this video, but they can be seen doing some rather strange things. Now, they do come from southern Taiwan, parts of China, and the river systems there. Water parameters are right around neutral. Size-wise, the sizes, for the most part, the males are going to be right around 2.5 to 3 inches. The females right around 2 inches. They're going to be a little bit shorter. You can see the coloration here. There is a little bit of a difference in coloration when you compare the males and the females. The males tend to be a little bit more gray, lighter in color. But what's really cool about the males, we're looking at a female here. What's cool about the males is the dorsal fin. There's more yellow with kind of a white outline to both the dorsal fin and sometimes the tail fin, where the females are going to be a little bit more brown. They're going to be a little bit plumper. They're going to be a lot more round. Their faces aren't going to be as large. Their mouth isn't going to be as large. We're looking at a couple more females here as well. We can see a male in the background in the far top over there. The one in the foreground, again, that's a rounder, plumper female. There she is. You can see her again. So there is definitely a difference between the males and the females. Males have a lot nicer color, in my opinion. They just kind of look a little bit cooler. In terms of their temperament, you know, if you were to keep these fish, you can see the big male back there now. Be really careful here. Their temperament is relatively laid back, and they will, in a very kind of humorous way, spar with one another. And it's not even really a sparring, it's just kind of like a, hey, you're too close to me. One minute they've got a goby pile, the next minute you can see two males here and he's kind of on top of the other one, and they're just like, okay, we need to settle this, you need to get out of my way. And often they will do that by opening their mouths and kind of just showing each other their big giant male mouth that they've got going on there. But very, very rarely does it end in anything other than that. So their temperament is relatively chilled out. They're not aggressive fish at all. They're not super active either. As you can see, they kind of just like to have a place to kind of hang out. So be really careful with your tank mates. We'll talk about that more in a moment. You know, like I said, we've had these fish for a couple years, and they've been really, really cool. So with the tank mates then, be choosy. You want something that is not going to be aggressive. I would certainly stay away from just about all types of cichlids with this fish. Maybe some small tetras that are staying near the top of the tank that aren't going to be fin nipping. I really don't see this as a fish that's going to be causing any kind of aggression issues or chasing other fish around. The one thing you will want to keep in mind is they do have, especially the males, have a relatively large mouth. We had a lot of pond snails and ram's horn snails in this tank when I first added these fish to the tank, and they are all gone. There's a little bit of small Malaysian trumpet snails, but even those haven't gotten very large. They do eat snails. They will absolutely eat shrimp. In fact, they would love to have a shrimp snack. So invertebrates, you'd have to be really careful. In fact, I probably wouldn't put snails and shrimp with these fish. So if I were setting up a community tank for these fish, I would want multiples. I am so happy that I've got the 8 or 9 that I have so that they can interact, because that's where you really see the goofiness. It's kind of like having clown loaches or something. The more you have, the more personality you're going to see. But for other types of fish, again, it's going to depend on the type of tank that you have. But, you know, things like cardinal tetras or neons, something that's going to be near the top of the tank, very unaggressive sort of fish. Rasboras might work out pretty well, but anything that's going to be a little fin-nippy or chase these fish around, I have a feeling they would stress them out pretty well. In terms of fish that would be on the bottom, cory cats would probably work just fine. We do have a bristlenose in here, and they have worked out just fine as well, but just nothing aggressive. That's the main thing. In terms of what we're doing for water parameters, the temperature for these guys are right around 78. They can go a little bit lower. I wouldn't put them a whole lot higher. Our pH in our fish room is right around an 8. These rhinogobias would do well somewhere neutral, a little bit higher potentially. Our water hardness is right around 180 parts per million, or around 10 or 11 degrees general hardness and carbonate hardness. They're doing just fine in that water as well. The one thing you want to keep in mind, again, these are gobies. They're not super active. They have reduced swim bladders, which means they're just going to be hanging out. As you see here, you do need to have good flow, good oxygen, high oxygen concentrations in order to really make these work. And of course, you don't want to have ammonia or nitrites in the tank. And we're trying to keep the nitrates at 20 parts per million or less. So feeding them has been relatively simple. When we first got them, there really wasn't a lot of information about this particular species. There's information about Rhinogobius as a genus, but not this species. So we started out just to be safe. They were much smaller at the time. We were giving them live baby brine shrimp, and they absolutely loved it. They still do, even though they're a little bit larger. They have larger mouths. They still love to eat live baby brine. They also go absolutely crazy for frozen brine shrimp and frozen bloodworms. They get really excited about that in their own little goby sort of way. But they're simple to feed. Sinking pellets are fine. In fact, in some places in this video, you'll actually see a little bit of floating flake food just to kind of bring them out a little bit and get them at least somewhat active so they weren't just sitting on the rocks all the time. But again, you can pretty much feed them any normal type of fish food and they're going to really love it. So again, you're looking at a 10-gallon here. I would say that this is probably the minimum that I would go as a 10-gallon. Again, we've got 8 or 9 in here, and we haven't had any issues over the last couple years. I think it would be cool to have them in a larger tank, maybe in a community setting with some very, very gentle fish. I would love to have another half a dozen or so to add in here. I just think that would look really cool. Decorations, you can see we've kept it relatively simple in this tank. I did want to make sure that there was a space for them to feel secure. So behind the sponge filter, there at one point we had a little bit of a cave structure going on underneath the rocks, which worked out pretty well. We do have that artificial kind of fake wood cave that's going on. Really super important. Make sure that there's nothing sharp inside of your tank. Remember, these fish are going to be resting on surfaces, as you can see here, for the vast majority of their life. So if you're going to be using gravel, make sure that it's smooth. Sand is certainly an option. You can see here the rocks that we have in the tank are all smooth, so they're not going to be scraping themselves. We've got this fake piece of wood thing going on that doesn't really have any sharp edges. So you just don't want them to scratch their underbelly and get damaged and get infected because of that. So the caves they really like, so sometimes you'll see 3 or 4 of them just all jammed in that cave. Again, just being silly gobies as gobies are. Filtration, you can see we have a sponge filter. It's been working out great. Usually that sponge filter has a little bit more flow, but it's been working out well. This could certainly be a fish to consider if you wanted to do like a river tank. We had a little bit more flow, nothing super crazy. But if you wanted to add a little bit more flow with maybe a hang on back, turn the tank sideways, or a canister filter, this might be a really good option for you. Of course, one of the questions we sometimes get is, can you keep these fish with live plants? And the answer is sort of. They're not going to typically eat live plants. In fact, they probably won't. The issue is going to be in their mating process. They sometimes will tend to dig, and so sometimes we'll see a pile of gravel from the back of the 10-gallon kind of all piled up in the front, and usually that's right around the rocks back there. So if you've got plants that are right around structure, they may dig those plants out, but they're probably not going to eat them or anything. They just might tear them up a little bit. So let's talk briefly about breeding these fish. There isn't really any information about this particular species, but Rhinogobius as a whole tend to like rock work. They tend to like structure or caves, and they'll dig out the substrate around the rocks or the caves and lay their eggs in that cave, where the male will usually be in charge of fry care, egg care, and protecting that area, and usually the female will be kicked out
shortly after breeding. You'll normally see a couple fish that just go missing for a day or two or maybe 3, and that's usually a key that these fish may be breeding for you. For this particular species, again, I have not actually had viable fry. One, I'm sure is because I've got so many in a 10-gallon. Two, I haven't put a whole lot of effort into it, but you're going to want structure, and you're going to want to have a substrate that they can kind of dig out around, and then most likely you're going to want to remove the other fish from the tank and let the male kind of do his thing. I would love to hear from you. What is the goofiest fish that you've ever kept? If you enjoyed this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.